Hello, it's a very warm welcome to this webinar, which we're hosting from the Edge Foundation in partnership with the Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board. It's great to have everyone with us. Thank you so much for joining us. The plan for this session is we're going to hear a bit about the amazing graduate apprenticeships in Scotland from a variety of different colleagues, including my colleague Andrea Laczik, who's head of research here at the Edge Foundation. He'll be sharing some key messages from a recent report that we were lucky enough to do with colleagues from SAAB. We're going to be recording this webinar, so just to let everyone know that, and it'll be made available afterwards as well, particularly if you've got colleagues or others who couldn't make it today but would like to find out more. As ever, I know it's kind of old hat now. We've been using these kind of webinars for quite a while, but you'll find at the bottom of your screen you've got a Q&A box, and I'll have a chance to ask some questions to some of our amazing panel a little bit later down the road, so feel free to put some questions in there. You've got the chat, which I can see whilst I'm talking, you're all making liberal use of, which is great, saying hello to each other, connecting, which is wonderful. I know it's not quite as much fun as being in the same room, but let's do our best. And a bit later on towards the end, we're also going to be doing a little bit of polling to see kind of what you think about graduate apprenticeships once you've heard from our panel and kind of gather some information. So I'm Olly Newton. I'm Executive Director of the Edge Foundation. We're an education charity operating across the UK, really focused on trying to make education more relevant. And so vocational education and great opportunities like graduate apprenticeships are very much what we care about. So I know we've got probably a range of colleagues on the call in terms of the amount you know about graduate apprenticeships already. So to start us off, I wanted to welcome Paul Campbell. Paul's kind of wearing two hats like many of us in this session. Paul is both Head of Learning and Organisational Development at Scottish Water, but he also chairs the SAAB Employer Engagement Group. And I wanted to invite Paul just to say a little bit about graduate apprenticeships to kick us off.
Yeah, good afternoon, Olly, and thank you. It's great to have the opportunity to join you in the call today. So yeah, I'm Paul Campbell and I'm the Head of Learning and Organisational Development at Scottish Water, and I am also the Chair of the SAAB Employer Engagement Group through the SAAB Group Board. So anyone who's maybe unaware of SAAB, SAAB is made up of a membership of industry leaders and experts across various sectors and sizes of organisations. And I suppose we can think of SAAB really as being the voice of industry on Scottish apprenticeships. So turning specifically towards graduate apprenticeships, Olly, these have been a fantastic addition to the apprenticeship family in Scotland since they were introduced in 2017. I think they fulfil a very distinct role within the Scottish skills landscape when it comes to higher level qualifications. And that's, I think, fundamentally because employers have been so closely involved in helping to shape and create GAs in terms of the qualifications and making sure these fully integrate both academic and work-based learning. So pulling that all together into a coherent learning pathway, which is co-delivered between employers and between higher education. And this ultimately, I suppose, means that graduate apprenticeships and graduates going through the process will spend about 80% of their time in the workplace doing work-based learning on the job, and then with the other 20% or so of the time focused on academic study and working and learning with a university. I'll maybe just use the other slide as well, Olly, if you've got it. And that just kind of outlines the range of different graduate apprenticeships that are available. I think another differentiator for GAs is that learners are employed and active in the workplace, so they're gaining real life experience performing within a role and learning at the same time. And in the case of a young person leaving school, for example, this means that there's not a lag time or a delay involved through going to university, gaining a degree and then transitioning into the workplace. So with a GA in that environment, the learner's already in the workplace and there's no lag time involved in it. So ultimately, as an employer, the hope would be that means the speed to competence and productivity for someone completing a GA will be quicker than perhaps a more traditional route, given the very close working arrangements with employers throughout the design and the delivery of the qualification. So it's quite different, and I think the employers I speak to view them as being quite different in terms of the approach and what they bring. Final thing I'd say is that GAs are great because learners can enter into a GA at various different ages and life stages, so that there's really flexible entry routes. This could be for an existing employee who wants to enhance and grow their skills and gain a higher level qualification. Could be as a progression pathway for a modern apprentice who's wanting to continue their learning and take that next step on the learning path. Or it could be for an employee or a young person who's entering into employment for the first time, where the GA could be used as the primary means to develop the skills and the knowledge required to perform in that role. So I think this type of flexibility and the employer involvement, both in design and delivery, is exactly what we need more of in a world of work where people are going to have to transition more frequently into a range of new roles and develop their skills throughout their working lives. Yeah, probably that end there, Olly.
That's great, Paul. Thank you so much. Really helpful introduction. And we'll be welcoming Paul back with his other hat on, with his employer focus, talking about the experience of being an employer who employs graduate apprentices in a moment. Before we go there, though, I wanted to welcome my fantastic colleague, Dr. Andrea Laczik, who is our head of research here at Edge. Andrea is going to share some of the key messages from the piece of work that we've recently done for SAAB. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Olly, and welcome everybody. Just to start with, I really would like to thank the SAAB colleagues and the SDS team for all your support and input into this piece of work. I only have 10 minutes, so I will have to be very quick going through and really just probably present something which will be on a honey string, and you will all pick up the report and read it. So our report consists of 4 parts. I mean, first, it examines the current policy position of graduate apprenticeships and its role in Scotland's current skill system. The second part discusses the future of labour market and future skills landscape. The third part, we looked into a small number of international examples, which may be of interest to you. And finally, the fourth part, we have also conducted a small number of interviews and focus group discussions to inform our thinking, which helped us identify 5 key opportunities which may further strengthen and grow graduate apprenticeships. Can I have the next slide, please, Olly? Thank you. I mean, Paul has already mentioned some of these things, so I'm not going through this slide systematically, but perhaps just highlighting a couple of other key features of GAs. GAs are unique in that they combine a job with academic study towards a degree. And this enables graduate apprentices to develop a range of skills necessary for the workplace. So there is a very close link between theory and practice as GAs go through their studies as well as while they work. GAs also build on professional and industry standards, and therefore there is a really close link to employers' requirements as they had an input into these standards. And I just want to reiterate what Paul already said, that graduate apprenticeships are open to, if you like, all age groups from 18 years onwards. They are open to existing employees as well as for school leavers who may want to take on graduate apprenticeships as an alternative route to gain a degree. Can I please have the next slide? So the future of, yes, that's great, thanks. So labour market has been changing rapidly due to the 4th industrial revolution. There are increasing megatrends such as automation and globalization, the growing green economy and implication from Brexit. These all impact labour market, jobs and skills needs. In terms of the demographic tendencies in Scotland, the working age population is shrinking. So is the number of young people between the ages of 15 and 29. And there are sectors that heavily rely on international, mainly EU workers. For example, in 2018, 10% of employees in food, drink and tourist industry sectors were non-UK nationals. So this is where Scotland's work-based apprenticeship system plays a key role. The number of apprenticeships have increased over time and new forms of apprenticeship developed, such as the graduate apprenticeships and the foundation apprenticeships. Also, in order to prepare for this changing world of work, the Scottish Government have emphasised meta skills, recognising the importance of human capabilities such as self-management, resilience, or problem solving. These are the skills which cannot be easily replaced by machines. And these are the skills that can be more easily developed in work-based learning environments. So hence, again, the role of graduate apprenticeships can play a big part here. So as Scotland plan for post-pandemic and long-term recovery, they want to ensure that skills landscape underpin economic and social recovery. Can I please have the next slide, please? Thank you. I mean, I won't spend a lot of time with the international examples, but what is really important here, work-based learning provision and work-related learning at university level are widespread in many European countries. For example, in Spain, there is compulsory work placement modules built into undergraduate degrees, regardless of the subject studied. Similarly, in Denmark, both academic and professional programs include compulsory internship, which can count up to 25% of the whole program. There is a clear emphasis on implementing work-based learning or elements of work-based learning across Europe. This offers a strong message and support for the further development of graduate apprenticeships in Scotland. We have also included a short description of a number of work-based learning provisions from Germany about the Meister qualification, from Norway, and that is from the University of Southeast Norway, a master course in optometry and visual science, which is offered through both the standard program and also through an industry master program. And then we also looked into the program is called Create Lithuania. So the example is from Lithuania, which is a very interesting program. And we don't have to go very far to find other examples. So we also included an example from Wales about the National Software Academy. Olly, can I please have the next slide? Thank you. And now I would come to the final, probably the most interesting part for you in this presentation. So considering the political and economic background, the future of work, and the small number of interviews that informed us, we have identified 5 key areas, if you like, 5 opportunities where graduate apprenticeship may develop further. So each key area is described in the report and is followed by a set of questions which helps SAAB and SDS to think about the future of graduate apprenticeship. So to start with, how am I doing, Olly? Okay, I still have some time, thank you. So the first area which we identified is building a more flexible graduate apprenticeship offer. So the world of work has been already changing before the pandemic, as I mentioned before, due to the fourth industrial revolution, for example, and the pandemic has further accelerated this change. So graduate apprenticeship will be critical in the future of work as they provide a flexible route for skills development, upskilling and reskilling. GAs offer another opportunity to gain a degree qualification by offering flexible entry and exit points onto the program, and it offers modular learning. So graduate apprenticeships also offer the key stakeholders flexibility to tailor the learning program to employers and apprentices' individual needs. So building on the flexibility of the GA program, interviewees suggested that program could go even further to embed greater adaptability and openness. So the second key area is upskill urgently, which is really about developing a more agile employer-led, employer demand-led funding system. So the starting point, again, is the changing world of work. This requires that the skills landscape is flexible enough to meet oncoming change. This calls for a funding system that is able to respond quickly enough to transformation expected over the coming years. So again, the interviewed employers have commented on the complexity of the funding system and noted that this may be holding back the system from responding quickly enough to the rapid labor market changes. Respondents were suggesting a move towards a demand-led funding model. So the third area which we considered is demonstrate commitment, which is about providing certainty and clarity of provision. So interviewees highlighted that they are keen to plan further ahead and would appreciate additional longer-term certainty in terms of GA's funding and policy future, and certainty and clarity of provision would help them to do this. So the annual tendering process that is currently in place can make it difficult for employers and graduate apprenticeship providers to plan ahead and prepare for the continuation of any existing GA program from one year to the next. So annual funding impacts on employers offering GA places and on higher education institutions securing teaching staff for the off-the-job training. Annual funding is particularly challenging for SMEs. So many interviewees consider the change to the existing funding system as a key driver for graduate apprenticeships to grow and prosper. I would like to reiterate again that I'm referring to interview material, but we have only talked to a small number of stakeholders in this piece of work. So there is certainly further research needs to be done around this, but there are some clear messages. So the fourth area which we looked at is future-proof opportunities, which is broadening the development of future frameworks to support diversity. So there is a clear message coming from employers. That is that they value a mix of academic and vocational qualifications and the broader employability skills, such as problem solving, creativity, and team working. So we have talked about a changing labor market, which also means that new job roles will be introduced, requiring higher level technical skills. These new roles may develop within the digital, green, construction, and engineering sector. GAs are well placed to meet these future skills needs. SAAB may want to consider broadening the frameworks currently on offer. Diversity should be also considered in relation to characteristics such as gender, socioeconomic status, special needs and disability, and ethnicity. Recruitment processes could consider higher education's commitment to diversity and social inclusion, and this would support employers' commitment to a diverse workforce. And finally, drive demand, which is about increasing awareness of GA programs and increased diversity of apprenticeships. So while the number of graduate apprenticeship has grown considerably since 2017, the dominant age group for GAs is between 25 and 34. So this indicates that degree-level work-based learning attracts existing employees. GAs offer an excellent opportunity for school leavers to go into a degree program that is different from the academic university route. So SDS should consider different ways for how to communicate GAs to school leavers and underrepresented groups. Stepping back once again to funding, annual funding also impacts on communicating the range of GAs available to prospective students as an alternative to other undergraduate studies. A longer planning and greater certainty would enable providers to highlight the GA courses on offer to prospective students. So it would offer a longer lead-in time for stakeholders, and that means employers, providers, and apprentices before apprenticeship starts. Next slide, please, Olly. Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm not spending a lot of time in this, but these are the set of questions which we posed at the end of each 5 key opportunities which we identified, and hopefully this will help reconsider graduate apprenticeships and also how it could be, it could grow and strengthen in Scotland. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Andrea, huge thanks for that great summary. That was really, really helpful and a great way to kind of kick us off. As Andrea said, a real highlight there of the amazing work that graduate apprenticeships already do, and then some really exciting opportunities to take this even further. And there's already some great comments in the chat from people who are keen to hire more graduate apprentices. So clearly kind of some excellent opportunities there. Paul has changed his hats, although you might not see it from the picture, and is going to come back now to share more from an employer perspective in his role at Scottish Water, what it's like employing graduate apprentices and what they can bring to a business. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Olly. Yeah, I suppose we can look at benefits through a number of different lenses, but for employers in particular, I think one of the most significant benefits is that GAs are so focused on work-based learning, so they're based on real work and occupations. And because employers are involved in the design and the delivery, as I mentioned earlier, there's that 80% learning in the workplace and 20% typically higher level academic input. It really brings a strong focus to learning. And work-based learning, and I think the employers I speak to who use GAs find, really value this. It's something they find really valuable. The other thing I would say from an employer perspective is the flexible entry routes that I mentioned earlier as well. They provide a real mechanism for employers to reskill and upskill employees at different stages, and as I mentioned, either for existing employees, for new starts coming into the workplace. So it gives you different opportunities as an employer in terms of how you can use it as a mechanism to upskill people, and that's really important when things are changing so quickly in the environment. I'd say there's other big spin-off benefits, Olly, as well for employers. So one of the things that, because of the work-based learning elements, employers have to make sure you've got the structures in place within the organisation, such as mentors and development managers, to really support and enable work-based learning as effectively as possible. And the kind of spin-off benefit of that really is that, you start to influence the whole wider learning environment within the organisation, and it really helps to support a more productive learning culture, which is something, that a lot of organisations will be looking for as well. So there's that additional enhanced benefit that comes to the wider business just through other people being so involved in the process. And I think the last thing I'd probably say is that generally as an employer, if you believe that a more highly developed and qualified workforce is a key enabler for employee engagement, for performance and for productivity, which personally I do, then GAs are one of the ways I think that the employers can help to unlock this and achieve it. So yeah, lots of benefits from an employer perspective, I think, Olly.
Thank you so much, Paul. We're going to turn to the kind of learning perspective now, and it's a pleasure to welcome Helyn Gould, who is Deputy Associate Principal for Learning and Teaching at Strathclyde University. Helyn, over to you.
Thanks very much, Olly, and good afternoon to everyone. So providing the perspective from a university is really a very different type of degree. At its core, it's an experience-based degree. So from the perspective of the learning provider, you can bring that perspective and understanding into the classroom, and that's hugely valuable to learning. It's a fantastic experience from the educator's perspective, but it also influences how you go about designing the degree, and the entire experience of it is really very different to a traditional degree. So the courses have to be learner and employer-centred programmes, and that's got to be reflected in the design of it for it to be effective. So you've created within that a different learning community from a traditional degree. And you'll find that the graduate apprenticeships provision across Scotland has really very much embraced that and looked to see what added value comes from the engagement and the activity between those different partners within the learning community. Because we have the university and the learner as the traditional relationship, we also have the employer very much playing a focus in this, because these programmes are at their essence, a blend of academic and professional learning, but it's mapping that theory into practice through professional competencies. And at Strathclyde, we have used for the work-based learning the professional competencies associated with professional bodies in order to actually bring to life that theory and create that the cycle of learning where you're immediately looking for opportunities to put into practice the theory that you are encountering within your learning. And that's very much something that we've seen in terms of the apprentices on the programme, that they bring that inquiry and curiosity into their workplace because they're looking for opportunities to see how theory works in practice. So I think the work-based learning generally provides just an enormous benefit, but it's also an opportunity for an exciting and meaningful learning experience for the student, but impact for the employer within this overall. So at Strathclyde, we've been involved in graduate apprenticeships since their launch, and in fact before their launch, in Trailblazer activity. And reflecting on looking at cohorts that have now gone through to graduation, there's a number of things that are probably worthwhile highlighting. We've, as an institution, really valued the connectivity to employers and being able to have that dialogue to improve programmes to make sure that we are addressing the needs of not only the apprentice, but the employer out of that process. But we've also seen that the cohort performance is very high in graduate apprenticeships. Our first cohort that's gone through to graduation at undergraduate area, as a cohort, performed really strongly throughout their entire degree, and that's certainly reflected in the attainment results of them at their degree classifications. And I think there's really two main reasons for that. I think it's partly down to the context of the experiential learning and them working while looking to apply that theory in practice. So a way of describing it, I think, is that it's like the difference between learning Spanish in a classroom in Glasgow and learning Spanish when you live in Madrid. And that's really what it is, the context and the work-based learning being involved within the degree programmes really allows that to flourish. I also do think it's the motivation of scrutiny that your employer is involved in your studies as well, adds an extra dimension as well, because it also is a very positive feedback loop in terms of them recognising your achievements and seeing your development as an apprentice. And I think overall that's really, very impactful. And generally, we've also seen some quite staggering business savings from some of our apprentices. And that's fantastic for us as an institution to be able to see, because that's what our ambition for our students is, for our students and graduates to have impact. And we're actually able to see that in very quantifiable terms. So I think that's my 5 minutes, Olly.
Beautifully put, Helen. I really enjoyed your learning Spanish metaphor. I know Andrea would have liked that as well because she's passionate about learning languages, but it's a really good analogy to what we're looking at here. So if you want a view directly from the front line, it's a pleasure now to welcome David Scott, who is a graduate apprentice at Aviva. David, over to you.
Thank you, Olly. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. So I think from our perspective, obviously being an apprentice, so I work for Aviva and I'm on the graduate apprenticeship programme, and I'm in my final year of university at the University of West of Scotland. And actually the support that I've been given over that 4 years has been amazing. It's been able to kind of do a degree at the same time as working, applying that learning straight away, which is something you don't necessarily do with a normal degree. And I think in school it's not kind of it's not a recognised choice to the type of pathway that you could go down doing a graduate apprenticeship, but actually it provides so many benefits from your own personal development, but also from that academic side. Because for me, I didn't necessarily see myself going into university straight away, but what I did see, I see myself in a workplace, but also studying. So I was on a modern apprenticeship programme before coming to Aviva, and then coming into the graduate apprenticeship, I've kind of seen those kind of real life benefits of actually being able to do a degree. And it's supported by doing that kind of work-based learning module, which is kind of regular, being involved in projects, working with different teams. networking, those opportunities that you're getting at the early stages of your career. And that's really progressed a lot of kind of both personal development, career development, and getting to the stage where I'm eventually going to progress on to a graduate role within the company, because I feel like that kind of framework works best for me. I think it's also the fact that, and I guess the big thing is the fact you're getting paid to learn. It's an amazing opportunity to not have to take student loans, be able to go into a workplace and actually show your talent and kind of your worthiness to kind of work in that working environment. And I think you learn a lot of skills through that. I've kind of been supported through mentoring and coaching throughout my apprenticeship, and that's really helped push me, because it's pushed me into opportunities which I wouldn't necessarily have considered. And that mentoring, I think, just gives you that perspective to someone who's kind of either a past apprentice who's went through the same process, but also someone who's more experienced. So I think getting that kind of both that support in the learning aspect, but also having mentoring and coaching is significant as well. So I also see the role in which graduate apprenticeships play in business. I think in order to future-proof our workforce, we have to start kind of making it more recognised choice, so we can see more apprentices at the core of the business. Because when we do have apprentices, you're kind of bringing them in from day one. You're kind of nurturing their talent, and you're able to kind of reskill and upskill them at different points. So I think being able to have that perspective is really good. So I think it also opens opportunities that, for example, I'm on the software engineering pathway, so I'm in a role as a software engineer, recently kind of moved teams, so I'm now kind of more front end development, but actually I don't see myself doing that long term, but that's a good thing. I look at that because I've learned the core skills of what it takes to be a software engineer, but now I'm going to kind of take that beyond to eventually progress into a leadership role, which I believe where my strengths and skill sets lie best. But I think that allows you to identify over those 4 years and be able to kind of go into a role which suits you kind of best. And I think also it's that kind of growth mindset. You definitely adapt to the kind of working environment a lot better, and I think that actually pushes you more in that kind of university aspect, and that allows you to apply the kind of most relevant stuff, because there is some stuff like at the course that I'm not necessarily found interesting, but it's fine because it doesn't necessarily mean I'm using it in my day-to-day kind of role. So I think that gives you a kind of perspective of the benefits that I see day in, day out being an apprentice. Of course, the challenges that come with the studying and work aspect, but I think it's about that skill in its own, being able to balance two, juggling priorities, especially in a kind of honours year. For me, it's a big year, but I'm still coping well with the pressure. I'm still able to push myself kind of considerably to the point where I hopefully will graduate in the summer. Ollie, that's kind of my perspective.
Thank you so much, David. It's always great to hear from you. So if I can welcome David and Helyn and Paul back to the stage. We've had some great questions in already. I apologise in advance that we're not going to have time to get through all of them, but I'm going to try and group them together into some themes and cover off some of those areas. So David, there was a lot of people kind of inspired by what you were saying. And one of the kind of key areas that I think people wanted to understand a bit more was, during your time at school, what would have made a difference to kind of you in terms of maybe more information or more opportunities to find out about GAs that we could kind of do more of now for young people who are coming through the system?
Well, I think especially in education, obviously university is an amazing pathway. Most of my friends are in university, some are in college, but there's not many of my friends doing apprenticeships. And I think that gives you already a good insight to, okay, what's going wrong? Why is there not a kind of balance there? So I want to see that kind of balanced better, because you almost have to convince your parents that I'm going to go down this pathway. It might not be kind of full-time university student, but actually what mom and dad, especially now, they realise the benefits that it's brought to my confidence, I'm a lot more confident than I used to be. I mean, I'm always a pretty chatty person, but what it's actually done, it's really helped shape some of those skills. So yeah, I think when you kind of look at the landscape of different people who are doing different kind of pathways, apprenticeships was never that, or if you do an apprenticeship, you're going to do well. It was kind of like, oh, that could be like a backup, or that could be a secondary option. But actually, I'm doing a degree, I'm in a workplace, I'm working in a kind of large financial organisation, and the skills you learn from that can't really be replicated.
Great answer, David. Thank you. And there's lots of really positive feedback about your input in the chat, so you can enjoy reading that in a moment. I wanted to just think a bit about kind of the other side and how graduate apprenticeships are created, particularly for maybe new sectors. Helyn, you mentioned you'd been involved right from the kind of Pathfinder Trailblazer days. Tell us a little bit about that process. How do you work with employers when you're creating a new graduate apprenticeship?
Well, I think there's two stages to it. There's the group that's managed through SDS, and they pull together the community that's interested in that. So that'll include the employers, looking to identify the particular roles that are involved in this, because what's absolutely crucial about a graduate apprenticeship is they are not conversion degrees. You have to actually be working in the area. You can't use it to move into a new area. So you actually have two ways that are important in the design of it. You need to fully understand the role that people will be in, as well as looking at the individuals coming onto a course and how those fit within it. So that basically it's employers looking not only at who they would like to do the course, but where do they want them to get to? What's the talent pipeline for that? What are the key skills that are absolutely crucial to that organisation? And then the academic providers who are involved in that process are looking at how that ties together cohesively as a discipline. Because I think one of the things that makes Scotland stand out in the approach that has been taken is it's not a job role that you're getting a qualification in. It is a discipline and a full degree. It's not degree light, it is a full degree. I should say, if I was leaving school now, I would do a graduate apprenticeship. Rather than come to university full time, because of the advantages associated with it. So I think it's absolutely influenced by employers from the very beginning. But then in the delivery of the programme, you have to understand, even for each cohort, for an established programme, who's in the class, what is it that they're doing, how does that fit overall, and how you can develop, and what the needs are for the individual apprentice within that process.
That's great, Helyn, really helpful. And let me ask you one other kind of, hopefully a quick one that somebody's asked, which is just about the eligibility criteria. So when you're recruiting, how do you and the employer kind of set? It's not quite the same as for a traditional degree.
It isn't. So we actually at Strathclyde go through a nomination process. And that's partly because it is about not just the candidate and whether or not this is the right programme for them and the right course. It's also about the role within an organisation. So you could have the most fantastic candidate, but they won't fit properly because they're not doing something in practice. So normally there's that discussion and a nomination process between the employer and with a particular candidate in mind and the university before you get on to the application process, because you don't want someone to apply and be rejected when it's actually to do with the role they're in rather than them as an individual. So hopefully that helps answer it.
That's really helpful, Helyn, and lots of support in the chat for your points, David, around kind of encouraging more young people to think about graduate apprenticeships and make this kind of more the norm, which is great. Paul, you said a little bit about this earlier, but I wanted to come back to you to tell us a little bit about like business to business. What is the business case here for kind of taking graduate apprentices? What are they bringing to your firm?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been mentioned already, Olly. So I think when we've been an early adopter, if you like, of GAs, and when they first came through, we had started using them for experienced employees, first and foremost, as a kind of progression route for people. So just picking up on what Helyn said there, looking at the careers that people are undertaking and thinking about how we could help people to progress further and get higher level qualifications in the disciplines that they were already working in. And that's really helpful from an employer perspective in terms of creating progression opportunities for people and a chance to kind of accelerate their learning in a kind of work-based context. We then started looking at them after that as a progression route for our modern apprentices. So Again, anchoring back to what Helyn had said, thinking about people who were coming through our modern apprenticeship routes and having conversations with them about the next steps that they wanted to take, and then progressing our modern apprentices through onto graduate level apprenticeships as well. So they were offering a progression pathway for apprentices coming in. More recently, we've also started focusing on trying to target it more at school leavers. So thinking about our talent pipeline coming through and how we attract talent. So from the attraction perspective, having that enticement of a young person being able to leave school and find a pathway to a higher level degree and qualification, which is the real deal, as Helyn said, it's a real higher level qualification, while at the same time they're kind of earning as they're learning. So, you know, that opportunity to attract younger people in and give them, you know, that pathway without the potential for things like maybe student debt. You know, if you were going through a more traditional route and you perhaps were incurring some debt. And it's also got the advantage there of the kind of socio-economic and social inclusive aspects as well. So potentially tapping into a more diverse talent pipeline as well. So if you've got young people who come perhaps from more socio-disadvantaged backgrounds, that whole opportunity to take part in a GA, earn while they learn, you know, is a really big thing. And I think for us, just the whole application of learning, you know, it's that close relationship between the graduate apprenticeship programme, what people are learning academically, the theory and practice. So theory and practice is so important. It's bringing the best of theory and the best of thinking from higher education institutions and then transferring that into the workplace and making it very real. It's the real sweet spot between theory and practice. And if you can get that right, it's incredibly powerful, I think. Because what you start to get is people who are taking that theory, taking that kind of research and all of the kind of thought leadership that's coming from the academic route and challenging within the organisation about how that can be applied. And ultimately, that really helps to drive productivity and performance. So I think from an employer perspective, those would be some of the things I would probably, you know, say in terms of the real benefits and what they can bring.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thank you. David, I wanted to come back to you, and there's a lot of interest in kind of how you kind of chose the units and the kind of project within your degree apprenticeship. So would you mind saying a little bit about that?
Sorry, in relation to
kind of your choice of kind of your projects and any kind of pathway choices that you took kind of within your graduate apprenticeship. And how did you make that choice? Did you kind of get advice from your employer or the university, or a bit of both?
Got what you mean now. Okay, so I think in terms of my kind of graduate apprenticeship, so the units, if you're looking at the degree and the different kind of work, the different modules involved, that's kind of set by the university. And there's a bit of flexibility in fourth year. You can do different modules, but obviously because it is a kind of core software engineering degree, it makes sense to kind of keep it as closely aligned to the other GAs on the program. But what I actually really like as well is the fact that in first and second year, I had a class of kind of 8 people. Yeah, that probably represents to why we need more people actually doing graduate apprenticeships, but I kind of got that kind of more one-to-one learning sometimes with the lecturer, which was good, and that's beneficial. And actually, we talk about kind of different projects and teams that I've been involved in. The pandemic, if I don't like to say benefits, but if we're to look kind of at like the benefits for my apprenticeship, it's actually opened a lot of opportunities because I've been able to network with people down across the UK, and that's actually allowed me to then work with a team based down in Norwich, even though I'm based in Glasgow. So I think that actually shows you that distance doesn't define kind of what team you're working with and where you're doing that work. I think what matters is what skills do you bring to the team and all those surrounding things. And I actually think just kind of tapping on to Paul's point about kind of that social economic background, I think that actually opens a lot more opportunities, because necessarily they don't have the kind of money to relocate initially, or actually open those kind of opportunities to them, because we need to really make a conscious effort to improve that. Just quickly picking up on 2 points in the chat. So I think someone was asking if it's kind of if I miss that kind of full-time student aspect. I think, yeah, I do a wee bit, because I don't really get to go on as many nights out during the week as some of my friends do. But it balances itself out. I go out on the weekends and I've got money to spend, so I guess it balances out on that. And also just to just say, because I think someone said not having to apply for a graduate job at the end of your apprenticeship. Yeah, that's a big bonus as well. It was my choice to apply for a graduate role. I didn't have to. I could go straight into a software engineering role. But because I used to be a Java developer, but I'm now a React developer, which is like front end. So yeah, you don't have to apply for a grad role at the end, but I chose to do that because I felt like it was the right thing for me. So I had to go through an interview again, but it was fine.
I hope you don't have to buy all the drinks when you go out, David, since you're the one doing the graduate apprenticeship rather than studying. I had one other one for you, David, and then I want to pick up a couple of issues with you, Helyn. But there's a few parents on the call, David, and obviously lots of the people who are here in other roles will be parents as well. If you were kind of helping parents to have a message for their young people who might be thinking about a graduate apprenticeship, what advice would you give them?
The advice I would give them is just kind of actually understand the kind of graduate apprenticeship itself, because actually I think you can see, like, from what I've talked about today, it's only from my perspective. It may not work for everyone, but what I can tell you is the opportunities that it's gave me is kind of beyond what I expected from it. I thought I was just going in to work in a workplace and do my degree, do my job, but actually I've been involved in so much. And actually, for me, being a kind of advocate and role model for apprenticeships, I want more people like me talking about apprenticeships and showing the benefits, because I can't do it on my own. I need kind of as many apprentices as possible to really advocate why they should be a kind of normal choice for people kind of either leaving school or in employment, because I just found out last week that my manager is actually doing an apprenticeship alongside her role. So actually, I think that shows as well they're for everyone, but we need to kind of focus on that role model aspect. And if I can kind of say to like any parent which is not unsure, definitely just kind of understand the graduate apprenticeship and understand the benefits it will bring to your kind of your kid. I was trying to think of the word there. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say on that.
That's absolutely great, David. Thank you. Really, really powerful advice. Now, Helyn, you mentioned you've been involved kind of from the start, and I just wanted to come back to you to think a bit about how this has changed, really. Obviously, all policies kind of change and develop, and as Andrea's kind of signaled through the research, there are some areas where we're hoping it's going to develop even further over the next few years. But maybe you could just reflect a bit about how things have changed even in these first few years of delivery.
I think there's been, well, for us, one of the things that we've gained more and more insight is to really strengthen that perspective of there being three different parties within that learning community, and how absolutely crucial the role is of the employer in this, and the employer being fully committed to what's involved for the person involved in this. Because, and it's worth, from David's perspective, you're at undergraduate level, you are a full-time university student while working 80%. It's not an easy option, and that's certainly something for the parents to be aware of. Having said that, anybody who has got a child at university will be aware they don't seem to be at university for a huge amount of the year, because they don't start until September, and by May they're pretty much finished. So it's not quite as bad a workload as it might appear initially. But I think that's one of the things you need to make sure that all of the parties involved in this are fully committed to the success of the apprentice, and that's really where the employer will get the most out of it. So I think from the very beginning, there's been a lot more clarity across the sector now of the expectations of what's going into it. It's not just giving up 20% of that person's workload, it's supporting them within the role. And I think that's where you get the ability as well to influence where things go from a graduate apprenticeship perspective, and can give feedback on gaps in provision, how that fits within an organisation, and keep that dialogue going, because the SDS are absolutely central to that process, to understanding the employer needs and the demands associated with these as well.
That's great, Helen. Thank you. And I know we've got quite a few colleagues on the webinar from different universities. And so a different angle just to check in on really is just the kind of flexibility. What elements of your inverted commas traditional program have you flexed in order to deliver GAs? And I guess, have there been any kind of flow through benefits from doing that to maybe some of your other degrees?
Yes, absolutely. We took the perspective that we wanted to do these from scratch. And that's what we did. We co-designed them with an employer advisory group, which was an open employer forum approach that we took. And we decided at Strathclyde to try, by making them learner and employer centre, cut down the amount of time you had to be physically on campus. So it was 1 day a month on campus, not 1 day a week. And therefore we created an online, very interactive blended delivery model. So we had online resources and activities, and we would have live sessions as well as part of that. And that was pre-pandemic. So you can imagine how beneficial that was to the full-time courses when we got into that. And I think we've seen quite a lot of change. It means that it is actually very flexible, because it allows you to control when you're doing it. And we do recognise that these are corporate programmes. And sometimes something at a work context will overtake, and quite rightly should overtake, a deadline that maybe an apprentice has. What we will keep an eye on at a university while being flexible is that doesn't happen too much, because that's not fair on the apprentice. So that needs to be a bit of a come and go, but of course it's about that flexibility and helping to support. You basically want the learner to thrive on the programme. And that means helping manage from their employment commitments as well as their learning commitments.
Fantastic, Helen. That's super helpful. Paula, we've got time to come back to you with just a couple of quick ones from the employer perspective. So obviously Scottish Water is a big organisation. I know you do a lot of work with your supply chain, but for some of those smaller industries, small companies, do you think that GAs can bring the same benefits? Are there any particular challenges for them?
Yeah, I saw that coming through as a question in the chat earlier, Olly, and it's a fantastic question actually about how GAs could enable and support kind of micros and smaller organisations. I think it's definitely one that the standards and framework group within SAAB who look at the kind of apprenticeship frameworks and how those should be shaped up to support industry. I think it's definitely one to wrestle with. I mean, what comes to mind is how you can create partnerships in that space, some kind of shared model perhaps, where people can go through the GA programme and perhaps work with multiple employers. But yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the answer to it personally, but I think it's certainly one that we should be thinking about for that whole future world of work and gig economy and freelancers and stuff. So yeah, sorry, I can't answer it specifically with a definitive, other than to say it would be great if we could do it.
That's a really, really important point, I think, and one that we're struggling with in all the 4 nations of the UK and elsewhere, how to really kind of make sure apprenticeships work for smaller businesses. And one final one for people, I guess, just kind of for employers who might be on the call and might be listening into this afterwards who are completely new to this, what would be your advice of where to start? Should they go and find their local university? Should they be looking online? Where would you go? Where would you send them as a first step?
As a first step, I suppose it's really understanding the needs of your business first and foremost. Where are you trying to go? What skills are you trying to drive up? And then taking that information, thinking about how graduate apprenticeships could help you with that. And there's different routes you could take, Olly. You can go to SDS, and obviously the SDS team can help with some of that. You can go to a local university if they're offering GAs and find out more about them there and think about how they could fit. But I would start with the need within the organisation, what you're trying to create as a business, the skills you're trying to develop, and then look at GAs as a route for that. And I would say they definitely are a route to do that. That would be my endorsement and kind of advocacy, if you like. It's a fantastic route for employers to choose if you can get that framework. But be very clear, I think it was Helyn who said earlier, make sure there is that match between the graduate apprenticeship and the occupation and the roles that people are undertaking, because you really do need that work-based learning element to work really well. You know, you have to be actually doing the job, and that's the real value in them.
Fantastic advice, Paul, and some great kind of comments in the chat from higher education institutions like Helyn's and others saying about how you work in partnership, and for employers to come and talk to you guys if they're interested. Now, we wanted to get a bit of interaction just at the end, and I've just launched a poll with a few questions which we'd love to get your answers to, just helping think about whether you do recruit graduate apprentices already, whether you think kind of from what you've heard, you might like more. So I'm just going to go quiet for just a moment while you read through that and pop some answers in for us. Great. And while we finish that, I'm not going to ask David since he's already doing his dream job, but for Paul and Helyn, one of the things that I always enjoy thinking about this is I think, Helyn, you might have mentioned it earlier, but if you had your time again, what would you do as a graduate apprenticeship framework if you could have your choice of anything? My one would definitely be, there's one in England that's like a forest ranger one, and I love the outdoors in my spare time. So if I had my time again, I would go and be like a forest warden and go and work in the Peak Districts or something on an apprenticeship. How about you guys? Paul, have you got something if you had it all your time again?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one, Ollie, and actually just going back to the whole conversation about influencers and parents and carers, and you know, trying to inform young people about their decisions. I'm in the situation at the moment where my niece is soon to leave school, and she's got offers from a number of universities. And she's very much thinking about that kind of normal traditional route. And I'm saying, no, graduate apprenticeship. You have to think about a graduate apprenticeship. That is the way to go. She's very, very good at maths and science. And I've been saying, look, you know, think about data science as a route to go. So
that's great advice from Uncle Paul. That's a growing industry for sure.
Possibly, I would possibly lean towards that one.
I love it. That's great. And Helyn, what would tickle your fancy?
It's interesting. I had my cousin in Australia, not my cousin, my nephew in Australia, do data science on my recommendation. That's the future for it. If I had to pick one of the existing GAs, I think it would be IT for business. So that business analytics and business computing side of things. I think that is just the experience of actually putting that into practice would just be fabulous. So I sort of elements of data science and that business computing perspective.
I love it. And David, would you stick with your choice, or would you do something wacky and different if you could do it all again?
Better be quiet in the office. No, I'm only joking. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's obviously, like, I left school. I done an IT support modern apprentice with the local council. So actually, I wouldn't say like I regret going down the modern apprenticeship path, then the graduate apprenticeship path. I think it's worked out well for me, because I think as well, like, because my wee brother, he's leaving school at the moment, and like apprenticeships I asked him, I was like, do you hear much about apprenticeships? And he was like, nah, not really. And he's not even considering that as an option. And I don't really know many people who are leaving school considering that as a first option, which is a bit of a shame, because I think sometimes it's viewed as not, like, for example, like if someone in school, if they're not as academic as the most academic people in the school, it doesn't necessarily mean to say it's not for them. So yeah, I would kind of like, but yeah, I think I've made a good choice.
I love it. I can see I've already got a couple of offers of forestry apprenticeships in the chat as well. So thanks, guys, for lifting me up there. Listen, David, Paul, Helyn, Andrea, huge thanks for your time this afternoon. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Over 90% of the people in the audience want to have more graduate apprenticeships in Scotland and a broader range of choices. So clearly you've made a really positive impression. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you to everyone in the audience. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to continuing this important work to grow graduate apprenticeships in Scotland.